You are listening to audio recorded at the Village Church. For more information, go to villagechurchbaltimore.com.
Good morning, Village. I'll be reading 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 32 to 35. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in the body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and secure your undivided devotion to the Lord.
We're going to dive in. During this holiday season, speaking of Christmas, it can be easy for some of us, I don't know if any of you experience this, it can be easy for some of us to fall into the trap of comparing ourselves with other people and to feel discontent with who we are and what we have. For example, it's Christmas, and so sometimes we're thinking of gifts to buy, and we're just naturally thinking of what we don't have or how we can't afford to buy certain gifts. We can't help but think about what we don't have. Sometimes we notice other people, they're putting up Christmas decorations in their house, or they're making these fancy Christmas cards, and we're thinking about our decorations and our Christmas cards, or our lack of decorations or lack of Christmas cards, and we just feel like that we don't match up. Sometimes we see people celebrating with their family members, and we look at our own families, and we just feel like, we don't have the same dynamics. I don't have the close relationships that I have with my family members, or maybe I have lost loved ones, and it doesn't feel the same. And we think about what we don't have, and it's unfortunate that often happens during the Christmas season. Many of us, we feel discontent, and we feel lacking, and we feel like we're always trying to compare ourselves to another, and it seems like they always have more. And sometimes these reminders of what we do not have distract us from remembering what we do have. Because Christmas is about the fact that we have the greatest gift of all, and that is Jesus Christ himself, God becoming man in the flesh. But unfortunately, we sometimes overlook Jesus, the greatest gift of all, whom God has given to us freely, because we are distracted, sometimes rightly so, sometimes unrightly so, by what we don't have. Today we'll be exploring 1 Corinthians 7. It's a pretty long chapter, and at the surface, it may seem like Paul is addressing a long list of different topics, but if you look closely, you'll see this pattern, and it is that there are these people that Paul is addressing, and these people are discontent with their current status. They're discontent with their current status, and they want what they don't have. They're trying to reach what they don't have. And in every one of these scenarios, Paul is encouraging them, remain in your current status, remain where you are, be content, and don't just be content, but actually be devoted and be committed to what God has entrusted to you at the moment. Instead of wishing that you have something else and being so preoccupied and so anxious and so troubled about what you don't have, rather trust God and give your undivided devotion to what God has entrusted to us. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Today I'll be dividing up today's sermon into three big chunks. Number one, be devoted to your spouse. Number two, be devoted to your condition. Number three, be devoted to God. Let's dive in. First off, Paul tells people to be devoted to their spouse. In verse 1, Paul quotes the Corinthians. He says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband." So here's what's going on. I think this needs some context. So in Paul's day, we talked about this in previous weeks when we talked about 1 Corinthians 5 and 6. Sexual immorality was pretty rampant. It was pretty common. A lot of people were committing adultery, and there were prostitution and things like that. So in the last chapter, Paul wrote, "Flee sexual immorality." He wrote that. But in reaction to this, some Christians were actually on the other side of the spectrum, and this was also pretty common in Paul's day and age. It wasn't just a Christian thing, it was also a non-Christian thing, that some people were so disgusted by sexual immorality that they adopted this view that all sex was bad. And this sort of stemmed from this, Greco-Roman philosophy that the physical realm was dirtier or worse or off than the spiritual realm. And so sometimes they viewed anything that was tied to the physical realm, like sex, as dirty. And they would pride themselves on the fact that they didn't need sex, that they were above sex, and they were these spiritual beings devoid of these physical desires. And so in their letter to Paul, some of these folks, they actually wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relationships with a woman, because Christians in the church had started to adopt this view that, look at all these people having sex. They're committing, these gross sins all over the place. So we're going to be above and beyond that. We're not going to have sex at all. So that was their stance. And so Paul's quoting what they said, and here's Paul's response in verse 2. He says, because of the temptation of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. This verse is a little bit unclear in the English, but in the original Greek, it's more clear. When he's saying each man should have his own wife, he's not saying, okay, go find a wife. That's not what he's saying. This word have actually means have sexually. It's implied there. And so what Paul is actually doing is he's talking to married people. He's talking to married people who already have wives or husbands, and he's saying, have sex with your spouse. That's essentially what he's saying. And he's saying, if you are married, don't have the stance of, I'm above sex, I'm going to be celibate even though I'm married. And he says, you're going to have sexual temptation, so have sex with your spouse. So that's what he's saying. So what's happening is there are married people in the church of Corinth who have adopted this unchristian concept that sex was bad, and they've stopped having sex with their spouses because they thought that was a holy thing to do. And so Paul's saying, if you're married, you're going to have sexual desires, so have sex with your spouse. So that's what he's saying. And then he goes on even more. Verse 3, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So here's what Paul is saying. If you're married, he's talking to married people, don't try to be abstinent. Don't wish you were celibate. Have sex with your spouse. That's what he's saying. Be devoted, wholeheartedly, undividedly to your spouse. Don't deprive one another of the intimacy, of the benefits of marriage. And he's recognizing sometimes you need alone time. Okay, he's saying that do not deprive one another except perhaps by agreement for a limited time. So this is a reality. Sometimes there are these spouses, there are these couples, and they're literally spending their time 24/7 with one another. And so that's not what Paul is saying, because he says it's okay sometimes, if you're getting into a fight, you're a little bit frustrated, there's tension, or fill in the blank, you're busy. It's okay sometimes to have some distance, but he's saying, but don't be separated for too long. Don't be separated for too long, but come back together and have sex. And in modern-day America, this concept that Paul's addressing, that there are these married people and they're trying to be abstinent, it's kind of foreign to us. We don't really experience that too much. Maybe they're out there. Most of the time, it's people who are not married and they're trying to have sex, and so that's sort of different. So when we're reading this, it may seem like Paul's, what he's saying is irrelevant to us, but I would say the principle is relevant, and that is that though we may not, as married people, single people, I'll get to you in a little bit, but I'm talking about married people right now. So though we, as married people, we may not intentionally try to abstain from sex, it is common for married people to not be devoted to their spouses. That is a common phenomenon, and that's the principle that I think that Paul is addressing. And it is common for married people to not be devoted to their spouses to such an extent where they can deprive one another of certain things. Right? Paul is saying don't deprive one another of sex. And so it can be common for married people to deprive one another of certain things, whether it is physical sex, whether it's emotional intimacy. And there can be all sorts of reasons why people do stuff like that. Maybe somebody in the relationship has a shameful secret that is disallowing, that is preventing intimacy. Maybe there is miscommunication and some frustration over miscommunication. Maybe there are these unspoken expectations people have for one another, and then those expectations are not met, and so they are arguing, they're having tension because of it. Maybe something happened recently. It wasn't necessarily anybody's fault, but it's just something traumatic happened or something happened that was detrimental to the relationship, and they're just in a stressful time of life or a busy time of life, and so they're having tension. Whatever it is, or maybe, it's something more minor that someone, didn't put the toothpaste cap back on or something. So whatever it is, there are plenty of scenarios today where husbands and wives do not want to be intimate with one another. And that is reality. That happens all the time. That's not just an ancient Greco-Roman world thing. That is a modern-day thing. And here's what Paul is saying. Even in those situations, do not deprive one another except, and he says, he uses these words, all these qualifications, perhaps by agreement for a limited time. In other words, yes, sometimes things happen, and it's okay not to be intimate for a while, but make sure you're on the same page and make sure that lack of intimacy doesn't become the norm. Make sure that lack of intimacy doesn't become the norm. And Paul says in verse 5, come together again so that Satan may not tempt you. Paul's hitting on something that's pretty hard-hitting, and that is that when a married couple is lacking intimacy, that's okay if it's a short time. That's normal. Every married couple and every marriage goes through that. But if they are dragging that lack of intimacy out over a long period of time so that it becomes the norm, so that they have given up on reconciling, so that they have given up on improving their relationship, so that they have given up on making things better, they are potentially giving Satan a foothold. They're potentially giving Satan a foothold in their marriage. That's what happened to my parents. Around 2003, my dad started traveling for work a lot, and he was out of the house a lot. That was just, what he did for work. And in the beginning, it was tough, and there was a lot of fights, and there was a lot of tension. And you might think that tension and fighting, they're bad things, but actually they're good things because they show that they still care about the relationship, and they still want to make things work out. But I started to notice over time, over the years, there started to be less fights, and there started to be complacency. And they started to get to the point where they were like, you know what, it's okay. We're just going to deal with it. And the lack of intimacy became the new normal. They stopped fighting, and they would become a lot more infrequent. Sometimes there would be, blow-ups and things like that. They became a lot more infrequent. And they came to accept the fact that they weren't intimate, and that was just, that's just how they were. And they lost their devotion to one another. And in 2011, 8 years later, my dad decided to move out of the house for good. And it wasn't overnight that the decision happened. I think at the time, it felt like it was such a sudden overnight decision. I remember being totally surprised, caught out of left field. I had no idea it was going to happen. But when I retraced the steps that led to that moment, when I thought about the whole process, when I thought about everything that panned out, it just made total sense. Because what had happened was my dad had been emotionally disengaged for years. And he just finally reached a point where he was just like, I'm emotionally disengaged anyways. Why am I engaged at all? And so I'm just going to allow the rest of my life, my physical engagement, to match up with my emotional disengagement. He realized that if he was going to be emotionally disengaged, he was going to be holistically disengaged altogether. And so Paul's warning against that, and he's saying, be devoted to one another. And if you lack intimacy, if you lack depth, if you lack warmth, don't let that become the normal thing to do. Fight against that. Paul recognizes, so he's warning married people, do not deprive one another except for a limited time. And when you do, make sure to come back together. Let's keep going. We're going to skip down to verse 10. To the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband. But if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman who has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. So apparently what's going on is some people in the church of Corinth, they were considering getting a divorce. And especially people who are married to non-Christians. So what was going on was, this was a pretty new church. And so a lot of people come from non-Christian backgrounds, and so you have these couples where one person would become a Christian and their spouse was not a Christian. So that was what was going on. And some of them were thinking, oh, wow, I'm living this new lifestyle. I need to be holy. There's already this thing going around that sex is bad anyway, so maybe I should divorce my non-believing husband or wife. So that was the thing that was going on. And even in those scenarios, Paul is clear. He's saying, don't get a divorce. Don't leave your spouse. As much as possible, if you can work things out, and if that person's willing to live with you, try to remain devoted to your spouse. That was Paul's stance. And obviously, there can be exceptions. Okay, I'm not going to go into this huge list of when you can get a divorce, when you can't get a divorce. We have a lot of people in our congregation who may disagree on that. And sometimes, I'm recognizing things are out of our control. People change. Marriages don't work out. That is a thing. My mom never wanted a divorce, but they are where they are today, and that's okay. And I also want to say, I know that some of you, and there's others of you, maybe I don't know, who have gone through divorce experiences. And if that's you, I want to say we are sorry that you went through that excruciating pain. And we're glad that you feel safe enough to be at our church. And it's not our intention to beat you over the head with anything like that. We're not trying to condemn people who have experienced anything in the past. So that's not what we're trying to do. But if you are here, so I'm not talking to you all, okay? We're not going to this section. But here's what I am talking about. If you are here today and you are married and you are struggling with your spouse and the option of divorce has crossed your mind, I want to encourage you to fight for your marriage. I want to encourage you to fight for your marriage and be devoted to your spouse. Even if it seems like your spouse is an unbeliever at times, I want to encourage you to fight for your marriage. Marriage is a sacred calling, and Paul teaches that, Jesus teaches that we are to be undividedly devoted to our spouse. So as much as possible, I encourage you not to give up. I encourage you to fight for your marriage. And if you need help, let us know. Talk to somebody, reach out to somebody. If you're in a community group, reach out to a community group leader. Reach out to me or Andy or Pastor Dan. Reach out for help. And you're not alone. I want you to know that there's plenty of times where I've talked to couples and they go, do you go through this? And because this seems pretty intense. And go, oh yeah, we've done just that too. So we do it too. So I encourage you to fight for your marriage, all right? So Paul exhorts his readers to be devoted to their spouses. Let's move on. Number 2, be devoted to your condition. In verse 17 to 24, Paul teaches us to be devoted to our condition, and he gives 2 examples, a religious example and a socioeconomic example. So first he talks about circumcision. In verse 17 he says, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him, and to which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in the condition, that's the word condition, in which he was called. So in Paul's day, circumcision was this religious symbol that it was like a status symbol. So it was a little bit like people today, they wear cross necklaces or they have Jesus fish decals on the cars. And it's just sort of the symbol of saying, like, this is who I am, and I am a follower of God. Or for a Jew, they would say, I'm an authentic descendant of Abraham, a true member of God's family. And Paul's saying, don't be so concerned about these religious status symbols. That's what he's saying. And he's saying, if you are uncircumcised and you want to be circumcised, or if you're circumcised you want to be uncircumcised, he says, don't be concerned with those things. Don't try to change your religious status symbols. In fact, don't be worried about what people are thinking of you at all. Just obey God and remain in the condition by which you were called, whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised. Sometimes today we may try to improve our religious statuses as well. Sometimes we want people to see how religious or spiritual we are in today's world. For example, here's just an example. Sometimes we come from a background where we never dress up for anything. Okay, that's just what we do. We just don't have a wardrobe for those sort of things, and we don't have a job that requires it, and so we just wear normal clothes all the time. And sometimes we have this mentality of, I'm going to go to church I'm going to go to church, and so I want people to think how awesome I am, how religious, how spiritual I am, how dedicated to God I am, so I'm going to dress up for church. And if you do that, nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But Paul's message would be, if your normal condition is that you don't dress up, then just be that way. Remain in that condition. Don't dress up just to show people that you are super spiritual, that you're super religious, you're super awesome. Because when you're doing that, you're being fake. You're not being real. You're trying to change who you are for God in a way that God hasn't required you to change in this way. So why are you doing that? And so Paul's saying, don't be concerned about your religious status, be devoted to your condition. And then he moves on to talk about your socioeconomic status, and this is potentially more contentious, but I'll dive in. Verse 21, were you a bondservant when called? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freedman of the Lord. Likewise, he who was free when called is a bondservant of Christ. You were brought with the Christ, do not become bondservants of men. So brothers, in whatever condition, there's that word again, in whatever condition each was called, there let him remain with God. So I'm not going to pack everything, but essentially what Paul is saying is, don't be overly concerned with moving up the socioeconomic ladder. That's what he's saying. Don't be overly concerned with moving up the socioeconomic ladder. Don't be so consumed with thoughts of, how can I get recognized? How can I get promoted? How can I get a raise? Obviously, he's saying, if the opportunity comes, make yourself available to that opportunity. So he's not saying, someone's going to give you a raise and say no. Okay, he's not saying that. He's saying, don't be so preoccupied, so consumed over it that controls so much of who you are. Understand that you don't have to get this thing that you really want. You can remain in the condition in which you are called. And don't just remain there, but stay committed and devoted to where you are right now. I'm definitely the grass is green on the other side type of guy. And what I mean by that is I tend to think about what I don't have, and I tend to think, oh, this person has that, and it seems like their life is so much better than mine, and so I need to get that. So I tend to think that regardless of how good my life is at the moment, I just tend to be that kind of guy. And I'm often second-guessing big decisions I've made in the past that have led to where I am today, and I'm going, oh, if I just made that decision over there, I could have done this, and what I'm always doing that. And I'm from San Jose, California. I was just there over Thanksgiving. I spent my first 18 years of my life over there, and I don't know if any of you know anything about the city, but one thing you should know about San Jose, California is that the median household income of the metropolitan area is $110,000. $110,000. That is a median household income of the San Jose metropolitan area, and it's the highest in the nation. And so that's where I come from, and I was just there over Thanksgiving, and I couldn't help but think, man, I could have made a lot of money if I stayed here. I'm looking at my friends, and they're working for Google and Facebook, and they have virtual reality things, and they have Teslas and stuff like that. And I just couldn't help but think, wow, this life is pretty good. There's a lot of traffic, there's there's forest fires and earthquakes and stuff, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good out here. I can't help but wonder sometimes, like, if I just made this decision here and this decision here, we could have stayed here. And it seems like God is speaking directly to me through this passage. He's saying, don't become a bondservant to money. Don't become a bondservant to your socioeconomic status. Don't be so obsessed about changing your life status situation. Don't try to change. Don't be so preoccupied about, this is what I don't have, and so I need to get that. Be content with what you have, and not only that, but be devoted to what you have. I'm not saying don't try to get promoted. I'm not saying don't ever relocate for a job or anything like that. Obviously, if there's opportunities that come up and it makes sense, take those opportunities. What I'm saying is don't be so consumed about the next best thing. Don't be so consumed about what you can get in the future that you never live in the present. Don't be so consumed about what you don't have that you never enjoy what you do have. Some of you all, and here's a word, some of you all in this church are transient people. And what I mean by that is you came here to Baltimore for a specific job, for a specific program, for a specific education, for a specific degree, and within a year or within 6 months or within 3 years, you're going to be out. And that is just your plan. Ever since day one, that's been your plan. And so I want to encourage you, it doesn't matter if you're here for 6 months, it doesn't matter if you're here for 6 years, I encourage you, don't be overly consumed about what's happening next. I want to encourage you, be devoted to what God has entrusted to you today here in Baltimore. Be devoted to your current calling here in Baltimore for as long as you have. Doesn't matter how long you have. And do that same thing your whole life, regardless of where you end up. Do that here. If you're here for a year, be committed here. You're going to be somewhere else for 3 years, be committed there for 3 years. And do that your whole life. And don't be so consumed about the very next thing. Because here's the reality. We have a big transient population, and we have a lot of folks, because they're transient, they've taken this mentality of, I'm not going to be plugged into our church. I'm not going to be plugged into our church. I'm not going to be plugged into Baltimore. I'm just going to get by, do the bare minimum, attend church on Sundays, maybe give every now and then, and I'm going to peace out and move on to the next thing. And I want to encourage you, get involved. I want to encourage you, serve. Go to a community group. Show up at events. Get involved with things like the Christmas gifts giveaway. Build relationships, close, intimate relationships with people in our church. And here's another thing. Consider becoming a partner at our church. So partnership is this thing that we have at our church where you are committing to walking with our church, to allowing the leadership of our church to speak into your life. You're committing to serve in our church. We have about 80 partners in our church. And so I encourage you to become a partner in our church. And it's not just what can the church get out of you. It's also what can you get out of the church. And I would say a lot of you all, just to be frank, are not getting what you can get out of our church because you haven't committed to our church. And so I encourage you to do that. There's 2 classes to take. There's Intro to the Village is coming up this Saturday. There's Pathways to Equip coming up next Sunday. Put that on your calendar. Whatever you do, I encourage you to take some time, think about who you are today. And I'm just speaking broadly, not just people who are transient or just people who are not partners. My principle here is take some time to think about who you are today. Think about what God has given you today, what God has entrusted to you right now, what your current calling is right now, and focus on that more than what God is leading you to in the future. I encourage you to be undividedly devoted to that calling, to your condition. Number 3, be devoted to God. Verse 25. Now concerning the betrothed, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. And so that's the same language that Paul's been using. He says remain in the condition, so that's what he's using. Remain as you are. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I will spare you that. Sometimes people have taken this passage and they've interpreted this to mean that being single is better than being married. And I don't think that's Paul's intention. He has all these caveats, right? He's saying, I'm not commanding this from the Lord. This is just my judgment. And he's saying, even if you do this, you're not sinning. But what he's saying is, if you're single and you marry somebody, you are asking for trouble. That's essentially what he's saying. If you're marrying somebody, you're asking for trouble. And he's saying, I think this is the mentality. A lot of times people who are single, they have this mentality of, once I get married, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be loved. And then I'll be complete. And what they don't realize is sometimes when you get married, you become more unhappy and become more unloved and you become more incomplete because you start to feel, not all the time, of course, sometimes you feel loved, happy, and complete. But the lesson is oftentimes you get a lot of trouble when you get married. And so Paul is saying, just watch yourself, be careful. If you're getting married, you're signing up for things that are potentially distracted, and they can give you a lot of trouble. And you can immerse yourself in these worldly troubles. And Paul is saying, I want to spare you from that. And then let's keep reading. Verse 29. This is what I mean, my brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none. And those who mourn as though they were not mourning. And those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing. And those who buy as though they had no goods. And those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. And so here's what Paul said. He's not forbidding people from mourning or rejoicing or buying things. He's just saying, don't be immersed in that if that is what you're doing. Because obviously, in Philippians, he's saying rejoice always. So he's not saying don't rejoice. He's saying don't be immersed in that. Don't let that control you so that you're having all these anxieties and troubles. Verse 32, let's keep going. I want you to be free from anxieties. That's his intention. I want you to be free from anxieties. And this is what Jay read earlier. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. That's what you want to do. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. That's what you want to do. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you. So he's saying, I'm not being legalistic. I'm not saying you have to do this. Again, it's not a sin if you do this. But to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. We don't know the specific circumstances of this letter. We don't have this original letter that was written to Paul, which Paul was responding to. So there may be things we're missing out and we don't fully understand. So we can't necessarily apply this, a broad stroke to everybody. So we're not saying no one should get married. But he does seem like he is saying if you are choosing to get married, you are putting yourself in a position where you may have an unfocused, divided mind. That is what he's saying. And what he's doing is he's acknowledging what many of us know, who are married know, and that is there are significant advantages to being a single person that you don't have anymore once you are married. There's significant advantages to being a single person that you don't have anymore when you are married. A Pew Research study last year said that we have a record 42% of adults in America who are living without a spouse or partner. 42% of adults in America live without a spouse or partner, and that's even including, people who are unmarried cohabitating. So our culture is moving in a direction where more and more people are single, but unfortunately, I would say, more people are moving in a direction where they are single for selfish reasons rather than unselfish reasons. And so it's not wrong to be single. Obviously, Paul is single. Jesus was single. Okay, it's not wrong to be single. It's awesome to be single. Okay, but more people today are choosing to be single for selfish reasons rather than unselfish reasons. And here's some selfish reasons, okay? If you're choosing to be single because you are idolizing your career, I would encourage you that I would just say that is a selfish reason to be single. If you're choosing to be single because you're idolizing your comfort, that is a selfish reason to be single. If you're single because you're idolizing your independence, that is a selfish reason to be single. And so, what is an unselfish reason to be single? Check this out. Verse 35, I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. And that's the key. If you are single, you are able to have an undivided devotion to the Lord in a way that many married people cannot have. So, some of you are all single and, and you want to be married, and you're thinking that marriage will make you complete and happy, and that's false hope. Maybe that's not going to happen. And the idea is, maybe some of you are idolizing marriage. And by idolizing marriage, Paul's saying your interests may be divided. You may be missing out on what God has in store for you right now. I don't know if you realize this if you're a single person. So I'm talking to you as single people now, okay? So this is your time. While you are single, you are able to do a lot of things that married people can't do. You have more time, you have more energy, you have more friends, you have more spending capacity sometimes. Single people are more able to join a serving ministry. Single people are more able to attend community groups. Single people are more able to participate in social events, especially, after 5 p.m. Single people are more able to meet up with other people one-on-one. Single people are more able to go on mission trips. Single people, you're able to do a slew of things that once you're married, and especially once you have kids, it's a lot harder to do those things. And I'm going to say this isn't from God, this is from me, okay? Some of you who are single, maybe, and you're trying to get married, some of you, maybe God hasn't yet given you a spouse because there are certain responsibilities that God has given you right now that you're not done with. Maybe God has given you certain responsibilities to do as a single person, and you haven't done those things because you're so preoccupied about getting married that you've neglected what God has given you while you were single. So don't overlook the things right in front of you that God has given to you right now because you're trying so hard to not be single. But regardless of whether you're single or not, so that's my little spiel to single people. Regardless of whether you're single or not, the core principle applies to us all, and that is this: don't divide up your mind. Have this holistic approach. Don't have this approach where, like, I'm going to give some of my attention to God and other attention to these people and other attention to my work. And don't have that approach. What we should do, because that leads to troublesome anxieties, what we should do is have an undivided devotion to the Lord. Have an undivided devotion to the Lord. Well, if that's the case, how do we make that transition? How do we have an undivided devotion to the Lord? How do we loosen up our hold on these troublesome anxieties? Because here's the thing. Many of us, we don't read the Bible regularly. Many of us, we don't have close friendships or accountability. Many of us, we don't serve. Many of us, we don't share our faith with others. And the reason why, I would say, is because we're too busy. We're too busy doing all these other things. And so how do we have this undivided devotion to the Lord when our minds are so occupied by all these different things that we're doing? And that's us. I would just encourage you to ask yourself, is my attention too divided? Is my attention too divided? If I'm not doing all of these things, like reading the Bible and sharing my faith and going to group, if I'm not doing all these things because I'm too busy, what are these things that I'm doing that are making me this busy? What are all these things? And maybe they're good things. Most of the time, we're not reading the Bible because we're killing people, okay? We're not reading the Bible because we're working or something like that. And so maybe they're good things. But think about this. Are these good things, like marriage, like a career, are these good things potentially distracting us, dividing up our minds so that we're not having this wholehearted devotion to the Lord? Am I lacking in undivided devotion to the Lord because my undivided devotion to the Lord has taken the fringe part of my mind, and the center stage part of my mind is taken up by all of these things that are making me busy? Have I become overly anxious about worldly things? Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your significant other. Maybe it's a video game. Maybe it's social media. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's fashion. Maybe it's a political cause. Whatever it is, there's this thing, or maybe it's a bunch of these things, that have so preoccupied your mind that you have that you have a divided attention, and you have what Paul says, divided interest, and you're not undividedly devoted to the Lord. If you're honest with yourself, these things have taken over your life. And it can be easy for that to sneak up on you. I felt like my devotion to the Lord in high school was a lot more raw. It was a lot more just passionate. It was a lot more undivided, simply because now I think about too many things, and I dwell on too many things, and I know too many things, and all these things, they've creeped up in my mind, they've taken up real estate in my mind, and I don't have this undivided devotion as much as I used to have. My devotion to the Lord has become more half-hearted, more mediocre. If that's you, I invite you to remember the gospel. Remember the gospel. And the gospel is that it is not that we are undividedly devoted to God, but the gospel is that God is undividedly devoted to us. The gospel is not that we are undividedly devoted to God, but that God is undividedly devoted to us. Because here's the thing. Sometimes we can be caught up with these commands that Paul is listing out, and we say, oh, he's telling us to do this and this and this. But that's not the point. That's not the point. All of these things are responses to the point, and the point is the gospel. That God has chosen to be undividedly devoted to us. And because of that, we can be free to be undividedly devoted to Him. The gospel is not that we are undividedly devoted to our spouses, but that Jesus is undividedly devoted to His spouse, the church. So devoted, in fact, that He saved His church, becoming a human being, dying, and washing us clean. The gospel is not that we are undividedly devoted to our condition, regardless of what that condition is, but it is that Jesus was undividedly devoted to His condition, that He chose to become a poor human being for 33 years, and He committed to that. condition. The gospel is not that we are undividedly devoted to God, but that Jesus was undividedly devoted to God the Father. So devoted, in fact, that the day before he died, he had a chance to opt out, to become independent, to become self-serving, to choose not to die. But he chose to honor God's will and die on the cross. The gospel is not that we are undividedly devoted to God, but it is that God is undividedly devoted to us. And so it's in that light that we respond to him. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for Jesus, because Jesus proved, as a matter of fact, once and for all, that you are devoted to us. So that no matter what we go through, no matter what circumstances we face, no matter how hard-hearted our hearts are, we can remember that you love us still, you fight for us still, you are with us always. But God, we do want to pray that some of us, in light of the fact that some of us have become lazy and complacent and half-hearted with our devotion to you, our devotion to our spouse, our devotion to our condition, our current calling in life. And we want to pray that you would give us passion, that you would unleash in us a passion to live as we are called to live the way you want us to live, not wishing for things we don't have, not always daydreaming or being preoccupied about all these things we're missing out on, but that we can be focused on our spouse. We can be focused on our condition, our calling, and we can be focused on you. God, many of us have become so busy, so preoccupied with these little things, these little trinkets in life that have distracted us from you, that have taken us away from you. And we've lost sight of our first love. God, I pray that you would allow us to fix our eyes on Jesus and allow the things of this world to grow dim as a result. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. At this time, we're going to move into a time of communion. Communion is when we remember the death of Jesus. When you're ready, you can line up on either side of the aisle. You can take some time to pray about it, think about what it means that Jesus died for you for a while, what it means that Jesus fully devoted his body to you, so much so that he was killed on the cross. And when you're ready, come on either side of the aisle, and regardless of what you've done this week, regardless of how you felt this morning, if you want to say, I want to dedicate myself to Jesus, I want to give myself wholly to Jesus the way he did it for me, then line up, grab the bread, which represents the body Jesus that was broken for us, dip it in the grape juice, which represents the blood shed for us, and take it right there, and then go back to your seat. Let's remember Jesus.